Zachary, welcome. Super excited to chat with you today. I was excited to get early word of the big fundraising announcement for your company and would love to just start with a bit of the high level on what your company does, who you are, and about the financing itself.
Oh, cool. Well, excellent. Thanks for having me. My name's Zachary Smith. I'm the founder, CEO of a business called Datum, and I've been building internet infrastructure for the past, 20, 25 years since I dropped out of music school and decided I needed to make a living. What we're doing at Datum is trying to provide fundamental access to something, that I kind of took for granted in my early days in the hosting and cloud computing world, which is kind of access to the fundamental primitives of the internet. And what we're trying to do is help a whole new class of builders, a whole new wave of cloud computing startups and alt clouds and machine learning companies and data clouds to gain access to those super big primitives of the internet. We feel that there are some pretty big innovations that have been kept away from builders because the interfaces of building and operating physical networks are simply too complicated.
Yeah. So you have a great investor list. I see a lot of familiar faces and names in there. How did, you're announcing 13.6 now. I'm guessing that, or correct me if I'm wrong, maybe that sort of came in pieces and, this is kind of like the all-in seed round. So tell me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd sold my last business to a public firm in 2020, stayed there for 3 years and kind of having done this a few times, just know that I'm a builder at heart. So back about 2 years ago, my twin brother and I, Jacob, said, hey, we're going to build a company. We had a pretty good idea about what we were going to do. And we basically started incubating this idea with a good friend, Alex Bennick, who had recently left Battery Ventures to start his own single operator fund called Encoded. And so we spent, about 6 to 8 months just kind of figuring out, hey, are we in the right zone? Are we really able to do this these days? I got a lot of gray hair. So I'm kind of thinking, hey, do I have this in me? And do I know how to build in this modern weird age? And as the AI stuff is all kind of happening, and I had to do a lot of triangulation. And so we incubated this idea. And then January of this year, we put together a pre-seed round. And that was $3 million. And Alex helped put that together along with some, I'm going to call it the ex-battery mafia. So Sunil over at Amplify. And it was great, brought together some people who really understood infrastructure and understood the importance of kind of connectivity ecosystems. And so we did that 3 million kind of to prove to ourselves that we could build, that we can make enough progress towards what is a very fundamental and big project. And then as we geared up to get to market, which we're doing later this week, and opening up to early access, we decided to raise additional capital. And that's where Reed, another ex-battery friend, who had strangely enough cold called me back, I think in 2015 when he was an associate at Battery. That's how we first knew each other. We'd stayed in touch and helped lead this round and put it together. So all in all, little over $13 million, but puts us in a position to really start onboarding customers and working with, the key platforms that we're really excited to jumpstart.
Got it. So Alex Bennick, and that's certainly a blast from the past.
Yeah.
It's interesting to know he's got his own fund now. I assume focused on developer tools and things of that nature. How it sounds like, was that kind of like you talked to Alex and you talked to one firm and that was it, or were you in conversations with other folks too?
I mean, I've had the pleasure of being able to invest in a lot of companies myself, and I'm an LP in about 20 different funds. So I have strong connective tissue with primarily single operators, although I work and co-invest personally along with some larger funds. And so, Alex was certainly kind of germane and very intimate with this process with me. But we had several other funds, right? And in the end, we brought in, we wanted diversity of mindset. I think it takes a village to access something like a marketplace that we're trying to create. We are trying to create the network effect, as it were. And so we were excited to bring on more voices. We also brought in Will from Step Function, who has a really interesting viewpoint on local first technologies and kind of newer waves of the internet. Vine Ventures here out of New York. It was great to have somebody on the home turf that we could really lean on. And Daniel Karp over from Servin. So although it ended up being led by Amplify, Sunil, that pre-seed round, we did bring in kind of a cohort together, and all have proved super valuable with different aspects, either in traditional networking or newer dev tools that really help informed our kind of early exploration.
Got it. And I saw Ex-Ante on there, so I know Zoe a bit.
Yeah.
And that one kind of surprised me. Like, I know they're into privacy kind of stuff. This struck me just as like a straight up infra kind of deal. So it was interesting to see that name there. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, we've had an awesome time getting to work with Zoe. And so, one of the core purposes of Datum is that we think the internet is getting reinvented around AI. And along with that, you may have heard the term the splinternet. I've grown up, and I think you mentioned that you had a background in internet infrastructure where primarily we were just connecting to each other, peering exchanges, interconnection routes. The internet has just improved so dramatically over the past 25 years, primarily because ISPs, hosting companies, cloud companies really work to interconnect their networks. But now we see a much more fragmented internet. You've got different rules in different states here in the United States about what content could be shown where. You have different countries. It used to just be China, but now Russia and Indonesia and all kinds of places. And then this boom in sovereign AI clouds, which is now putting up, I'm not going to say barriers, but let's call them rules and restrictions, policies related to AI data. And so we actually believe a significant portion of the internet is going to be private and more curated. And this already exists today through enterprise networks and other kind of carrier options, where about 2 times the amount of traffic goes through the private internet than happens in the public internet. But we think that is going to be a necessity to comply with all this, complexity around privacy and regulation. So actually it aligned super well when we met Zoe. We were working with one of her portfolio companies, a company called Iro, which makes a routing protocol, an open source routing protocol built around certificates. So instead of using IP space to route packet, it uses kind of a zero trust certificate model. And we're super interested in that because it can give flexibility. We're very interested in technologies that can allow choice in how your packets get routed where over the internet. And so we just found that she was accessing a totally different group of builders who I would say we were not like privacy first, but definitely had a lot of the same, they were rhyming to the same language that we were. So it's been awesome to just bring in that additional voice and different worldview.
Interesting. So it's like her portfolio, even though, true, not usually doing a bunch of infra deals, but the overlap with the customer base and the shared mission is kind of like what made that come together.
100%.
Got it. Interesting. And then Servin is in this as well.
Yeah.
And part of what you do is like edge proxy kind of stuff, right? Did I get that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're starting there.
Got it. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, they were an investor in a company called QPoint, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And I know one of the co-founders of QPoint because he was on my team at DigitalOcean.
Oh,
so
nice.
What's on the edge side? I guess first question is, sort of what is what you're doing different from what they're doing? And then the second piece, I'd just be curious, I see what you are doing is broader in scope, but there is overlap, right? And so trying to understand a little bit, how that was navigated during, the diligence process.
Yeah, cool. Well, big fan of Tyler, also an investor in his business. So, really excited by that. Servin, I know Daniel Karp for a while, primarily from his time at Cisco. And a key part to our mission at Datum is to be kind of a neutral operator. And we really want to enable, probably informed based upon my couple years at Equinix, where we really had this role as a neutral place at Equinix for the internet. And that included a diversity of hardware vendors, a diversity of competitors and operators. That's what creates an interesting ecosystem. And so, we see that our role is actually as a foundational operator. And we're using, for example, the Envoy proxy as an initial technology. But we fully aim and expect that we'll be helping to support whether that's Tetrate having their own cloud or us powering Tetrate, or this QPoint maybe could be a great partner for us. We want to see, hey, how do we bring together this kind of diverse and very evolving set of ecosystem partners on the technology side and help them connect to their customers. And I think that would be like the biggest thing that we're doing at Datum that made this not competitive. I could give you another one, which is over at CRV. Reed is also a big investor in Tailscale, which may look like a lot of what we're trying to do with some of our connectivity options. And in reality, we see networks as very heterogeneous. And what we see as the gap is that there's not kind of a global telco, an operator who isn't kind of inventing the technology, but is there to operate it in a neutral manner and connect people to their customers. That's what Datum wants to do. Of course, we've had to balance that with making things easy and consumable. And so we've had to pick some open source technologies that we curate to start with, but we're super excited to move to what we call our provider tier, where our goal is to help 1,000 new clouds. So QPoint's a cloud, we want to help support them. If F5 wants to be a cloud, we want to support them as well.
And sorry, to go back to Iro, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Was one
Yeah,
of Zoe's companies. How did that, you were working with Iro and then that's how Zoe got wind of you guys sort of being in existence, or how did it
happen, right?
Yeah.
Well, she's super cool and in Brooklyn, and occasionally I get my way out there. So I think actually somehow Alex Bennick introduced us, but separately we had been working with Brendan at Iro just to investigate his protocol, because we were looking for a tunneling protocol that could allow folks to connect into what we call our virtual backbone, our Galactic VPC. And so it just so happened that we found out that she was an investor there. And I can't exactly remember how it came up in conversation, but it probably resulted in you should talk to Brendan. And we're like, oh, wait, that's the guy who we're on his Discord channel. Okay. So yeah, small world when it comes to these things.
Got it. Yeah, the reason I asked is just we were interviewing the one of the founders of Reducto, which so Benchmark did the A, and I think the B was Andreessen, and so we were talking. I'm always sort of curious, how companies get on firms' radar, outside of just sourcing databases and cold calling and things like that. And so in that case, it was just something in a board meeting that came up and kind of put that company on the radar with them. So I was curious if this was the same kind of thing. Sounds like it's a little bit different, but
I spend an abnormal amount of time trying to, one thing I learned in my last couple of companies is that, activating your investors is effort. You invest and water that tree and it can grow, right? But you need to pick investors who actually, do want to support you beyond capital, and B, you have to give them information. You have to arm them. And so I do a few things. One is a super verbose monthly memo that I write to all of our investors and all of our constituents. Have done that every month since we started the business. And it helps them just have the context to be able to actually say, hey, wait, this is maybe you should talk to this person, or I had this idea for you. And the other is I just spend time with them. And so it's an investment, but that usually leads to, ideas and activation and connection points, which frankly, I like to say that Datum's in the wealth management business. We're not trying to help everybody, not everybody's going to be a big global cloud operator that needs connectivity to all its global enterprises, but there are a few hundred that will, and those are usually connected via the same people. And so, not dissimilar from actually the VC business of, being connected to the right people at the right time. I feel that's how our business works as well. So we invest a lot in the kind of bespoke relationships versus the mass marketing.
Yeah, got it. Makes sense. How, just to kind of go a little bit technical into the weeds now. So you mentioned, hey, we could go and integrate this with F5 and their hardware and different software out there. I assume the answer would be the same for, at some point, maybe you integrate with Cisco stuff, right? Same. Yeah.
In theory, yes. In practice, there's some challenges because we are committed to a persona that is looking for a cloud experience. Mm-hmm. And a cloud experience, I generally mean, we maintain this GitHub awesome list called the Alt Cloud Awesome List. Mm-hmm. And we kind of define it as what equals a cloud. And to us, it has to have some sort of consumptive basis and, some sort of way to access on your own. And oftentimes what I've seen with some of the traditional, certainly Cisco is making efforts related to whether it's through Splunk or it's Cilium acquisition and whatnot, to move towards more kind of cloudy services. You can't fix like, I have not found yet how to take a 2-tier distribution model of selling hardware through a reseller on somebody's specific price list and make that cloudy, right? You got to be committed to taking certain parts of your technology and making them kind of cloud capable. For example, a global pricing, right? Versus like, in this region, it's this for this customer, but in that region, it's that for that customer. That's very, very difficult to cloudify. So, I would say maybe this is more than you were looking for in your answer, but whether it's F5 or Cisco, I'd also look at the cloud native versions of those. For example, maybe it's Nginx from the F5 portfolio, or maybe it's something like Tetrade's Envoy, as an example of a cloud native version that we would like to work with and support.
You said cloud. I thought you were about to say Cloudflare, and actually that reminds me of Cloudflare. So I've been pretty impressed, and full disclosure, I do own not a lot of the stock, but some of the stock.
Congratulations.
I kind of view them, I worked at AWS as well, in sort of the early days of AWS, as they were just kind of like starting to really hit the startup market pretty hard. And Cloudflare to me, like they have sort of similar kind of product and engineering vibes to AWS, and, just like shipping a lot of services, a lot of products, kind of seeing what will stick in a way, but kind of marching towards this, big unified vision. And so, some of the functionality certainly that you have, edge stuff, right? Like that's Cloudflare's bread and butter. So how would you mentioned, wanting to kind of partner with all sorts of folks, like what would be the partnership angle with someone like a Cloudflare versus, I think there's clear areas where you're doing some of the same stuff.
Yeah. Well, so we've been investing in a technology you might be familiar with called SRv6, or segment routing. And, we're basically not very original. We're taking the kind of like primitives you have in the physical world of data centers and networks and interconnection, and upgrading those to a kind of like logical standpoint from a virtualized endpoint. And so we have like ways that you can bring in and out your traffic. We have this thing called a Galactic VPC, which is basically a virtual backbone that you can. Cool. It's kind of cool, right? I mean, the hardest part is always the name. This Galactic VPC allows you. I mean, you can spin up, one for every customer, all your sub customers, whatever you want, and this gives you this kind of virtualized backbone that has the power of like MPLS, where you can define how and where you want your packets to go. Right. But without the complexity, you can basically tag them with policy. Okay. And so this kind of virtualized backbone is coupled with our Meet Me Room. And that Meet Me Room allows you to take in connections, for example, reverse tunnels or ngrok or Tailscale, or maybe a direct connect from AWS, or, access your Zayo network, et cetera. And that's work I envision. And I worked with Matt Prince back in my last company to form what was called the Bandwidth Alliance, which was, hey, how do we remove like transit charges between companies that are peered, basically. So if we're peered, let's just not, burden the customer with moving their data around. And so I could see ways where Cloudflare has some incredible services and capabilities, but I suspect for most, say, enterprise customers, they mix those with a lot of other things, like with Palo Alto they have to deal with, or with Amazon, or with other things, maybe a new cloud provider like OpenAI. And so we would like to support and maybe integrate with partners like Cloudflare in our Meet Me Room. And we want to be that kind of virtual neutral room where these different cloud scaled services can come together. And that's kind of where I would suspect, for example, I wouldn't say that we will ever have more edge capacity than Cloudflare. It's one of the biggest networks on the whole planet, maybe just right next to Google and a few others. But we'd certainly love to leverage that, plus some of maybe kind of our neutral capabilities with other providers.
From a company building perspective, if you could have an ask or one or two like top asks of our audience, folks who are following this again, founders, funders, operators, what would you ask of them? How could we be helpful as a community and a group?
Yeah, well, I think that my number one thing is to lean into community. I feel that right now we have this opportunity not to compete as much as collaborate. In the early days of the internet, my favorite thing to go to was Ninog, and peering forums at Nanog, where we all kind of work together to like even competitors. I worked with Ben at DigitalOcean when I was running a company called Packet to interconnect our networks and make them better, even though we knew that we were competing in certain parts of the market maybe. And we were just building a better internet together. And I just loved how that happens. And I feel that we have a whole new wave of clouds. And what we're trying to do is like, there's a reason why all of Datum is open source. It's AGPL. It's why we work on everything in the open. It's why we've created a whole bunch of free software that you can go and use to help you build your own modern cloud, because I think there's a whole new wave of cloud operators coming to market, whether that's, I'm going to call it scaled data clouds like Snowflake and Databricks, or it's like new inference clouds, or, all the stuff happening in the AI world right now, that there's so many new clouds, but we need a way to work together. So that's what I would say is like, be open to collaboration. I think it's going to take a village. We're not all going to have a privacy expert on how to deal with AI regulations in Turkey, but maybe if we work together, we would all be able to get it done better. So that's what I'm hoping is we use the best parts of open source to align around things that makes everything better versus kind of a winner take all. So that's what I would suggest. If you have portfolio companies or you're investing in businesses, let's build an open garden. I think that would be my first ask.